In this video, we're going to go through the template functions that came with the visual calculations feature in Power BI. We're going to go through each one of them and how you can utilize them to simplify your DAX calculations. All of that and more. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi, my name is Fernan, and welcome to the Solutions Abroad YouTube channel, where we cover tips, tricks, and best practices when working with Power BI. I upload new videos every week, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified when a new one is out. So in the latest Power BI feature updates, the one from the February 2024 one, the Power BI team has released the visual calculations feature. This feature lets you write your measures on a visual level, and I did cover some of its basic features in a previous video, so if you want to learn more about it, check out that video. And along with it came some template functions, which you essentially use to pre-create those functions that you would use in a visual calculations perspective. So today we're gonna have a look at those template functions and how they actually work. So let's have a look at this report that I prepared for you today. It's basically the Northwind dataset. And I have a bunch of things here in the model itself, but what you need to understand is just that we have a very basic model for our purposes today. So it's just a subset of the Northwind datasets with, a few values. And if you don't know, it's essentially a mock-up company that sells grocery goods internationally. And in this report view, I've just added two visuals, which we'll use for our demo today in different perspective, and we will use visual calculations with these two visuals. So to start with visual calculations, you first select a visual, then select new calculation. If this is not available to you, you just need to make sure you enable it from the settings menu. So when you do have that already enabled, when you click it, it will open up this new view for us, which gives us a formula bar at the bottom here along with a preview of our data. So this data is represented by the line chart or the visual that we've selected before we selected the new calculation. And the formula bar is essentially where we create the new visual calculation. So the template functions that we are talking about are the ones here. So if you click the FX button here, it will show you a few options that you can start using to kind of change how your values are calculated on a visual level. So let's start with the running sum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click running sum here, which will, as you can see, will pre-create a measure for us or a visual calculation along with some functions. And the only thing that we'll need to change are the input, which in this case is just this field. We're going to replace this by selecting sales here. If you select enter, and you can rename this whatever you want. We'll just leave it to running sum for now. What it will do is it will add another value on your y-axis. It will have this little icon not signifying that it's a visual calculation, and it will add that value as well on your visual as a separate kind of data point. So running sum or cumulative sum is, if you see here, essentially it's just adding up the value of the sum that we have on a month-to-month basis. So if you have the sales value here on the first axis on the sales, the running sum would basically be adding up all of the value preceding that month. So the August 1996, for example, is 26,000 plus 30,000. And then September is just adding up everything before the September. And cumulative sums in general are pretty good at showing the progression of a data point. And you typically use this type of visualization if you want to show growth over time. And as you saw, it was pretty simple to kind of create your own running sum with just, a one function. Whereas in traditional DAX, it would require a few more lines of code, but it does have its uses, including the fact that you can reuse it. So if you want to learn more about how I used it, and I used it in some examples like a Pareto chart, for example, go check out that video because I think it's very interesting. So the next one that I want to cover is moving average, which is essentially a calculation that takes into account periods of time and getting an average of it. And the idea is that it reduces the impact of any high fluctuations in your data points, making the line that you have smoother over time. So let's have a look at how that looks like. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to hide the running sum that we have. So we'll just leave the sales value there as we had originally. And let's add another visual calculation. So let's click add from here and click the visual calculation button here. So again, we're going to select one of these templates. We'll select moving average. And again, what it's done is it's pre-created the syntax for us. And all we need to do is replace the values or the input values in this function, moving average. So we're going to give the field sales, and the window size is basically how big should your moving average be. Now, in the context of this visual, it's a month-on-month type of visual. So the number that you put here would basically mean months. So in this case, if we put 3, it would be a moving average of 3 months. So if we click enter, as you can see, the dark blue line is now overlaid on top of the normal sales that we have. And just looking at the visual itself, you'll notice how the dark blue line is a lot more smoother than the original sales value. And that is because on each period or on each month of this chart, it's taking into account 3 months worth of sales, which essentially just smoothens your line out to account for any data points that are too high or too different from, the typical range. So you can change. So the higher your window size is, the smoother the line gets. And it's essentially a way to kind of gauge the sentiments, and it's typically used in kind of analysis for, financial instruments like, trading. So let's try to change this to 6 months. Let's see. So as you can see, the bigger the range is, the smoother the line gets. So just to explain to you how it works, I'm going to edit calculation again. I'm going to switch it back to 3 months so we can have a look at what it actually does on the table side here at the bottom. So looking at the sales, you can see, for example, we're looking at September. September has 28,145.83. And what it does is it adds up all of the sums for this month and the previous 2 months before it, and then divides that sum by 3. And that's how it gets the 28,000. So that is essentially how moving average works. And again, moving average in the traditional DAX way is a little bit more complicated than just using one function. And you need to kind of bear in mind how you have your data model set up. But it is a useful skill to know. So if you want to learn more about moving average and how you can do it the traditional DAX way, I'll leave a link to it somewhere in this video. So now we've covered the first 2 templates. Let's move on to a different visual to look at the other types of templates, because I think they make more sense to visualize on a different type of visual that is not time series based. So let's have a look at this matrix table here, which is essentially just a summary of all the products in its categories and their total sales. So it's a fairly simple visual, really. So now with this selected, let's go and create a new calculation to go back to this view. So let's click this once more and let's have a look at some of the options below it. So percent of parents. So if you hover over it, it gives you a description of what that is. So it says that it calculates the percentage of a value relative to its parents. So if you select that, you'll see that it's a little bit different from the ones that we looked at before. It's a combination of different functions, but it works pretty much the same way. So you just need to replace the input values with the values that you have in your visual for this to work. So what we'll do here is we'll replace a few values. So the field, as usual, will be sales, because that's the one that we want to actually calculate. There's a function here, collapse, which will also use sales. And the axis that we will have here will put the grouping or the level that we want to analyze. So in this case, we're just going to put product name. So if we hit enter, what it will do is it will add a new column in this matrix, which makes sense. And what it will do is for every single category in this, will be 100%. And for each of the products, it's calculating the percentage of that for this parent. So for example, and maybe it's a little bit easier if I first of all go up one level to show you for each of the categories are 1, which is obviously 100%. And then if we expand that to the 1 level hierarchy, you'll see that each of these sales are calculated against that category parent. So this type of product, for example, accounts for 52% of this specific category of beverages. So that is basically how percent of parent works. If you want to get the percent of the grand total instead, you can also use another template for that percent of grand total, which if you click, again, it will fill up the formula bar here the same way that we had before. So again, we'll just replace a few of these values. So this one's sales. This one as well for the field, we'll change sales. And then for the axis, instead of referring to the level, we just refer to rows because we want to get we want to calculate every row in this visual. So if you hit enter, what you will see, and you can compare and contrast it with the percent of parents. So instead of giving one category 100%, it calculates the grand total percentage. So again, if I just go up one level, you will see exactly what the difference is. So it goes through all of as a grand total gives you a percentage value. So let's go back to the visual calculations and let's go to the next one, which is average of children, which does exactly that. So this function does exactly what it says. It takes the average of the group that you have set up in your axis. So in this case, what we'll do is we will just fill in the blanks here. So we'll give it sales on its field, and the axis, like before, we will choose product name. So what it will do is it will get the total of each of the products that you have in that level. So as you will notice that for every single product, the value of that will be the same as what you have in the average of children. But where it differs is the the subtotal on that group level. So this 23,877 is essentially adding up all of these different products. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So adding these all up and then the sum divided by 12. So that's what gives you this average of children value. So now let's have a look at the last set of template functions that you can use, which are actually fairly simple. So for that, we're going to go back to our visual here, our time series visual, because I think it's a lot easier to show on this type of visual. So I'm going to click a new calculation once more. Expression templates, you'll see these versus ones, which is essentially comparing a value from its previous value. So this one versus previous, if you want to compare the current value against the previous value, this is what you would use. So if you click on that, again here, we can just simply fill in the gaps. So if you do sales, and on the previous, we'll add sales as well. Here we go. So what it will do is it will give you the delta or the variance from the previous month. And it's doing the previous month because the visual is on a month level. So as you notice, for example, in August, we have 26,609 in sales, whereas the previous month is 30,000. So the variance of that is about 3,500, which is what the versus previous does. But obviously, if you change your axis to, let's say, year, that calculation also changes with it. So before we move on to the next function, I want you to pay attention to essentially the optional parameters that some of these functions has, because it's not always so obvious or it's not required. So it's not really part of the template when you autofill it, but it is there in case you want to change some parameters or how it behaves. So for example, if we just go back to this versus previous calculation that we just made, in this previous function that we have for the visual calculations, if you hit comma within the previous parameters, you will see that there are a bunch of inputs here that are box bracketed. This means that they are optional, so you don't really have to use them for the function to work, but they do change what your values or how your return is calculated. And the best way to check these out or to learn more about them is by going through the documentation. But let's give it a try and see what this does. So for example, here, let's have a look at just the steps, which I believe just changes which month or how far back you are comparing your value against. So by default, it's looking at the previous value that you have in your visual, which in our case is the previous month. But what if you wanted to compare your sales this month compared to 3 months ago, and you want to keep doing that? So in this step, you can just change that. So we'll put 3, which will mean like compare against the sales 3 months ago. So if you hit enter, you'll see that the value that you return or that it returns is a little bit different. And why is that? So if you look at October 1996 now, it's giving us an 11,000 variance. That's because it's comparing its value, 41,000, against the sales 3 months ago, which I believe should be the 30,000 here, the July 1996 sales. So that is one of the things that you should pay attention to, the optional parameters when you're working with visual calculations. Right, so let's move on to the next one, which is the versus next, which does the complete. It just compares your current value against the next set of values that you have in your visual. So looking forward instead of back. So again, here we just change it to sales. And as you can see, that's what it does. It compares your sales 30,000 compared to 26,000. And the last two, the versus first and versus last, just compares your value or any of your current value against the first value that you have in your visual. So in this case, well, let's just fill in the blanks first and let me show you what it calculates. So it gives you the variance, but you'll notice that it gives you at the very first line of your table 0. And that's because it's comparing against itself, which is the sales for that month. But if you look at the 1996 one, it's comparing against July 1996. And actually, because July 1996 is our first data point in this visual, it's always comparing to that value, to that 30,000, and how that compares to the current value. So the versus last is actually self-explanatory. It's exactly that, except it's the opposite. It's comparing against the last value of your visual. So as you can see, if you scroll down to the very bottom, you'll see that it's 0, it's inversed. So everything or every single month is comparing to the sales that we have in the last month that we have in this visual. And that's really it for this video. I hope that was useful to you, and I hope you now know some of these new template functions and how you can start using them with visual calculations. Thanks for watching. As usual, give this video a like if you found it useful. Give it a dislike if you didn't, so to do better for next time. Ask your questions in the comment section box below so I can help you and you can help others. If you like this video, we have a Patreon page where you can support the channel and get exclusive perks like early access, demo files, and credits at the end of these videos. Thanks again for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.